It kind of feels like we should be dubbing in the Star Wars theme song music, you know, the dun 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 dun, or something like that here, because this part of the process, the actual writing, is where most people get hung up, and it's the part that most people dislike the most. This part of the process is where you remember your high school English class and facing a blank page for a 1,000-word report that was due on Tuesday, but it was 11 p.m. on a Monday night and you had no ideas and hadn't even started yet. This is the part of the process where you remember that you failed English, as Ed famously did, and you think to yourself, how on earth do you fail your native language in school? It must be no good. All those old gremlins can come back when you sit down to do the writing. That old self-doubt comes back to you. I was always told that I was a really good writer, but I mucked up pursuing journalism as a career when I was 18 because I was afraid that everybody said that I was good, but that good wasn't really good enough to make it in the real world. Writing absolutely terrified me too. So before we get into the business of actually writing your article, scripting your video, whatever medium it is that you're choosing to produce in, I want to offer you one tip to get better at writing. You just have to do it. And I know that you were probably looking for something a little bit more inspirational, but let me go on here for a second. Ed tipped me off to a book some time back. It was called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. You may have heard of it. The main premise of the book was that experts and prodigies and those overnight success stories that you hear about are actually made. They're not born. And that it takes about 10,000 hours of practice time for those people to achieve mastery in their field. Gladwell gives a ton of examples throughout the book. He includes things like concert violinists and Bill Gates and the Beatles, among a bunch of other examples to support this 10,000 hours of practice to mastery idea. So, I mean, I guess the old adage is true that practice makes perfect. But we don't want to be perfect at writing. We just want it not to scare us. We just want to be comfortable while we're doing it. So I'm not going to ask you to put 10,000 hours into practicing writing before you actually sit down and do your article. What I am going to ask you to do is to make a point and to make a commitment to writing each and every single day. The more often that you do writing in a casual setting, the less intimidating it'll be when you sit down to do it, for work. It's always kind of concerned me that there's got to be a comedian doing a bit on this, I'm sure, but it's always concerned me that a doctor or a lawyer has what's called a practice. I'd really prefer that they weren't practicing when they were working on me, right? But just like those professionals, as an internet marketer who's in the business of publishing, you need a writing practice. So here are a few ways that you can practice your writing every day. You can keep a personal journal and write down the events of the day or your thoughts or your feelings. You can keep a business journal, and this works for people who think that a personal journal is a little bit too Dear Diary for them, and a personal journal does not have to be a Dear Diary, woe is me kind of situation, but some people still have a block around that. So you can keep a business journal. What are you doing in your work? What problems are you facing? How are you overcoming challenges? That kind of thing. You can follow Julia Cameron's advice from her book, The Artist's Way. She suggests that you write 3 pages every morning about whatever comes to mind without stopping. Just let it flow. If you don't know what to write, she wants you to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, over and over and over again until another thought comes to you. You never lift your pen from the page, you just keep writing. You could also get a book of writing exercises and do 1 writing exercise per day. One that I like is called Now Write Nonfiction. Since most of my writing is for work purposes here, it is nonfiction, and so that's what I like to practice when I'm doing my writing practice. The key here is that what you're doing is a practice. It's something that you do. You maybe don't even do it very well because you're just practicing, but you do it every single day, rain or shine. You put in the hours. You get used to it. When you practice something, you get better at it, and you will get better at writing when you practice it like this. It becomes familiar to you, and that way when you sit down to do it for an actual work, blog, article, video assignment, it won't scare you because you've done it. You've been doing it every day. So commit to spending 15 minutes per day on your writing practice, just to practice. Don't write internet marketing stuff or don't write an article that you put on a blog. Just practice writing with any of those ideas that I gave you before. If you don't do anything else that we talk about in this course to improve the ways that you create new matter, new material, at least do this one thing: develop your writing practice every single day. It is that important. In fact, why don't you pause the video right now and do your first 15-minute writing practice? Remember, it's for nobody's eyes but your own, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just 15 minutes of writing. Now that you've got a little practice time in, it's time to actually put the article together. The best news is that you've already done all the legwork when it comes to planning and organizing your thoughts. Because we did our mind map and our outlines, you know exactly what big and little points you want to cover, and you know what order it should all be covered in. So let's go back to our tomato growing outline and we'll look at the actual business of getting the writing done. You remember this example that we mind mapped and we outlined on how to prepare your soil to grow tomatoes. Well, here it is again, and it's ready to actually write. Since each paragraph here is already outlined for me, I don't have to wonder and worry what I'm going to say each paragraph that I have to write. I know the first thing I get into is that one has to turn the soil, so I'm going to get right into writing that. So let's do this paragraph. Turn soil. Tomatoes prefer a soft, loose soil to grow in. It helps their roots reach water and nutrients in the soil. So your first step in preparing your soil for your tomato seedlings is to turn that soil and break up the large clumps of dirt to make it loose for your seedlings to grow in. You can use a pitchfork if you have one, but a good old fashioned shovel will do just as well. Make sure to smash all the clumps. I've already used that word. I'm going to write something. To fine sandy loam. Alright, there's my first paragraph. Easy peasy, right? So next time I'm going to go into the remove rock section. Say something like, while you are breaking up all of the clumps of dirt, you'll also want to remove the large rocks as you come across them. And then in that paragraph later on, I'm going to discuss the sifter and the screen and how one can purchase one of those and use them to sift out the smaller rocks that are tougher to get by hand. And on and on and on throughout the piece. When I do the test pH section, I'm going to cover that your pH should be in this area, and I'm going to cover that you can use lime to adjust your pH should it be necessary, so on and so forth. And again, because I've already got everything broken out into chunks, all I have to do is write one chunk at a time. Rather than going, oh my gosh, I have to write this article on how to prep soil for tomatoes. It's going to be long. It's supposed to be a big evergreen piece for my site. Where do I even get started? I know where to get started, and I know exactly what I'm going to say in each of these little paragraphs, and then as I write, I just do a chunk at a time, and this is going to be my next chunk, and then after that this one, and then after that this chunk, and so on and so forth, until I've completed the 8 or so chunks that are going to create this whole article. Now you'll notice that I didn't write an introductory paragraph first. That's a trick that I use because I always stall at writing introductions. It's just something that for me can give me, quote, writer's block. So I much prefer to write my introductory paragraph afterwards when the piece is done and I know everything that I've covered and how I've said it and how I want to frame everything. So I'm just going to go down my outline, making a paragraph or more if needed for each of those topics. At the end, I can pop in a conclusion or a call to action for people, and then I'm done. When you're writing like this, your piece won't be polished and it won't be perfect by any means. You see, I've got errors in mine right now. But I want you to stay away from editing while you're writing. So let me show you some of the best tips for doing the actual writing. I like to oftentimes write in a text file and just a plain text format. And that way you're not fiddling with fonts, you have less distraction because there's less stuff that you can do in the text editing environment. You're not worrying about, oh, I should make the font on my headline larger than in the rest of my article, that kind of thing. And also because when you write in a text file, when you copy and paste that, what you've created into, say, your WordPress write post screen or wherever it might be, it's going to work wherever you paste it, because there won't be any compatibility issues. Now, we kind of covered this, but the first paragraph can oftentimes be the hardest, so skip it and start at the second paragraph. That's exactly why I skipped the intro in the tomato growing example. You can go back to the introduction later. Since you've done your mind map and outlining, you know exactly what you want to say content-wise, so it's okay to jump into writing right there rather than setting up the whole piece with an introduction in the beginning. You also want to make sure that you're doing your research later. You've immersed yourself in your niche. You know a lot about your topic because of all of the work that we did in Module 1 to create a Google Reader that's feeding you information about your niche every single day. So as you're writing your article, you're going to have enough of a basis of information to get the piece out. But you might be missing a statistic that you need, or you might realize that you want to link to something, or you want to look up something in a thesaurus. You saw that note that I took to get a better word for something. I wrote thesaurus in all caps because I'd used that word twice. But resist the temptation to jump from your writing into the internet to do research or to get that link. Leave a note in all caps, just like I did that says, you know, link here or thesaurus here to alert yourself when you're back in the editing process that a change needs to be made in that spot. The important thing while you're writing is to just keep the flow going. Aside from the fact that if you go online to do some research or to look at the thesaurus or whatever the case may be, you can get lost and then end up not coming back to your writing for an hour because it's pretty easy to, you know, we check our Facebook and our email just because we have the browser open, and then next thing you know, it's an hour and a half later. But it's also just, aside from time management, it's that the flow of writing, we just need to focus on the flow of writing as opposed to the editing. You also should be writing to one person. When we write to a really large audience like our blog readers, we tend to group everything into this broad universal format to fit everybody. We try to be inclusive to everybody. But when we do that, the writing can get watered down and it becomes less you, and it has less of your voice and your essence in it. And who you are isn't able to shine through as much. So when you're writing, imagine that you're creating the article just for one person, or the video just for one person. So some ideas on who you can write for: it could be for your ideal blog reader. It could be your cousin or friend who's also really into this niche, just like you are. Maybe it's that you want to write to a prominent blogger in your niche who you respect and you've come to sort of know through immersing yourself in Google Reader. So thinking that, you know, I want to write a piece that would be good enough for his blog, or I want to write a piece that would impress her, or a favorite author for that matter. So pick any of those. Pick what works for you and what's comfortable for you, but have a clear picture in your mind of the one person that you're writing to. And when I say to have a clear picture, I mean to think about where they live, think about how old they are, think about what gender they are, think about where they'll read this article, at their cubicle at work, on their iPad in bed. Think about how passionate they are and how educated they are about your particular niche. Consider all those things, picture that person in your mind as you're writing your article. Also, you can kind of take on a persona, and that can be helpful. This isn't to mean that you'll pretend to be somebody else, but today, for this article, are you the angry you or are you the helpful you? Are you surprised? Are you intrigued? Are you bored? Consider who you are when you're writing this piece, and let that shape the language that you naturally use as your writing comes out. And last but not least, edit later. This is absolutely key. Don't fiddle with your writing when you're actually writing. I'm going to cover plenty of editing points to consider in the next video, and you will have plenty of time to polish your work. Right now, it's just about the writing. Leave the editing for editing time, and always remember to separate the two. Separate your editing time from your writing time. If your writing's taking you forever, it's because of one of these two things. The first thing is that you didn't do a full job when you mind mapped or outlined. So you still don't have exactly where you need to go with your writing all laid out for you, which means your brain's still processing that information. And since it's still working on what to say, it can't really start saying it yet. So if you find that you're still having a blank screen and blank mind kind of situation when you sit down to write, go back to your mind map or outline and flesh it out some more. And the second reason why your writing can take too long and get tedious is because you're editing as you write. Going back and rereading what you've written, changing words, looking things up, moving bits around is not writing. That stuff is editing. So I think it goes without saying that if you're doing both jobs, the writing and the editing, it'll take you longer than if you were just doing the job of writing. Ed mentioned how first drafts of even the most famous authors can be pretty bad sometimes. If you've read Stephen King's book, it's called On Writing, he includes a section in the back with the first draft of a story he wrote, and then he includes the story again with the editing marks on it. And I mean, that section alone makes the book On Writing worth buying in and of itself, because it's a huge confidence booster. When you read his first draft, you see that it's really not all that good, and that there are a lot of places where he's redundant, or a lot of places where his descriptions are a little flat, and you see that it's the editing process that creates the polished piece. It doesn't just come out of him that way. He is not gifted in a magical way that you're not. It's about editing, and it's about doing, because obviously, like the Malcolm Gladwell principle, at this point in his life, he has quite a bit of practice. But even as somebody who is so practiced in his art of writing, his first draft is not ready for prime time. And if Stephen King's first draft still needs a thorough edit, then of course yours will too. So just let the draft come out as it is. What's most dangerous is that when you're editing as you write, the most dangerous thing about this process is that you're also judging your work. And this first draft isn't about being good enough. It's not about being ready to ship. It's about getting the words out there. The edit is where all of the make me look smart and good, all of the polishing happens. So in your first draft, don't worry about sounding like an idiot. Don't worry about not using big words and sounding smart. Don't worry about how you didn't put a comma in the right place. You don't have to sound smart in your first draft. You just have to get the words on the page. So get to writing.